pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey. You have the agenda in front of you? Make a motion to approve the agenda for tonight.
Second.
Motion to approve in a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Commissioners Heinchan,
Yes.
Schober,
Yes.
Roar,
Yeah.
Braun, Mayor Freilich.
Yes. Hey, new business, long-term financial planning.
Okay, Justin and I, finance department, we're gonna tag team this one. He will fill in the color where I have missed some gaps. Long-term financial planning, just to summarize, the budget planning process is a three-step effort. The first step was to develop the long-term plans for the city for personnel, machinery and equipment, public facilities and infrastructure for the 5 years of 2026 to 2030. Step two is the step that we're in right now for the Budget and Finance Committee, where we have kind of developed that long-term financial plan based on the plans that were presented by departments and discussed through a number of working sessions. And step three is yet to come, but it will be the result of the Budget and Finance Committee's work in developing the long-term plan as it then goes to formulate the 2026 budget. Starting with long-term plans, just to summarize a little bit further, from January to April, the City Commission conducted 7 working sessions with department managers and engineering firms to review and discuss the preliminary long-term plans for 2026 to 2030 for personnel, machinery, and equipment, public facilities, and infrastructure. This month, the Budget and Finance Committee met twice to review and discuss funding recommendations for the city's long-term plans. Today, May 27th, is the final working session with department managers, and the Budget and Finance Committee will be presenting some funding recommendations for that 5-year plan. And we've got some handouts. Pass out the personnel and capital outlay requests that have been reviewed and recommended for funding by the Budget and Finance Committee. Just wait until everyone gets one. Okay, the items that are highlighted in green are those that are included in the city's long-term financial plan. And they are also projected to be sustainable based upon the city's fund balances and revenues over that 5-year period. You will note on page 1 for personnel requests in our police and fire department, we actually rolled those up 10 years. Because one of the recommendations is to fund new police officers and career firefighters out of that 1/2 cent sales tax, of which the city would need to revise the resolution for that. But because of the volume of positions requested, Justin and I felt that it would be, we had to do our due diligence on this one, and we actually rolled those scenarios out for 10 years instead of 5. The other thing I want to point out at the very top, you will see a position highlighted for real property appraiser that only represents one position. It's one position with the fiscal impact rolled out to all 5 years. It's not a real property appraiser position, new position each year. It is this one position with the fiscal impact rolled out, which includes salaries and benefits. For those departments that don't see some of their items highlighted, do not be discouraged. Your request will be reconsidered for funding during the city's long-term financial planning process next year. So if these if the items that are not highlighted are still priorities at this time next year, they will be reconsidered for funding. But those that are highlighted in green were those that the Budget and Finance Committee felt that it could sustain over that time period. Any questions on that?
Craig, did you maybe want to, you admit, got to touch on what the discussions we had for the fire department? Position, how many stations we could staff with the green items for the fire department? Before you jump in, Mitch, we did sit down with Mitch and just talk through, okay, with the 8 additional positions highlighted in green for the fire department and the fire department staff and operate 3 fire stations. So I'll let Mitch speak to his thoughts on it.
Thank you. Yeah, so we did look at it and I kind of crunched some numbers, and so if we were to add 8, we'd be obviously better than we are today, but the 9th would really be beneficial because then we'd have our staff would be divisible by 3. We'd run 3 shifts on 3 stations, so it leads for a balanced shift schedule. If we had that, we would run 3 at one station, 3 at another station, and 2 at the other station, because there's always one firefighter off with either sick leave, training, hour reductions, because overtime requirements. That's, I mean, we could do it with 3 at one station, 3 at another, and 2 at the big station, not staff fully. It'd be better than we are today, so.
And fire department is looking at applying for a grant
Sorry,
for
yeah,
6 positions.
it's a huge thing that I completely forgot about. Yes, as of Friday, the federal government did open up the SAFER grant for staffing assistance to hire firefighters. So we've been working with the finance department on what number do we apply for. We've been successful in the past with that. It's very similar to the COPS grant. We've had, I think, 4 or 5 positions in the past 10 years, 15 years that we've been successful. So trying to figure out what that number is. If we were successful, does it move the number out? Get to the half-cent sales tax, we're not looking for firefighters, or what's sustainable. If we hired them today, would we have place for them at station 2, kind of thing. So we're trying to decide what number of firefighters we're apply for through Greg and Justin, Jim.
I understand. Now, these numbers here, are they salary numbers? Or are they salary and benefits together?
Correct, salaries and benefits
Just together.
combined.
So when you look at each one, so for example, you go into the fire department, firefighter, and the first one you got 89, and each one goes on, but that's how much would be added each year to that budget if you keep that position.
That's correct.
So I
That's correct.
understand,
Yes.
so I know what symmetrics means.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you get the SAFER grant, then with that grant, we would hire Say 6 more?
Potentially, I mean, we haven't run that exercise yet, because when we met with Greg and Justin, they took the half-cent sales tax and said, you know, if you hire 12, the original request, whatever, you know, in year 3, I'm just making numbers up, the half-cent sales tax is broke. So when we said, well, that doesn't make sense, if we hire 8, the half-cent sales tax will be able to sustain the majority of that.
Correct.
You know, with the assumption of doing 3 this year, 3 next year, so on. If we get that safer grant, we would have to calculate what that, where the sweet spot is for hiring to have staffing for Station 3, but not just hiring to hire people either. And if we time it right, then we can take the burden off the front end of that half-cent sales tax fund, maybe slide it out a couple of years and lead to positions.
And that safer grant information or the email from Mitch about that came after the Budget and Finance Committee had a chance to,
This is just Friday. I think,
Yeah.
right?
yeah, so we really didn't have a chance to quantify what impact that would have.
So those be positions. Off of the highlighted green ones. So there's 8 highlighted green ones. With
Yeah.
Say an additional 6 would be.
Potentially, we don't,
Potentially.
because it still goes back to sustainability, long-term sustainability is the biggest thing.
And that's why with the police officers and the career firefighters, we wanted to run our numbers at least out to 10 years. And the items that we highlighted in green are those that we could sustain over that 10-year period and then going forward.
Thanks.
So the grant just pays for their salaries for so many years and then the city would take over.
Yeah, so the question is that, what does the grant fund? I believe it's 25% year 1, or 75% of the cost of employees for year 1, 75% of the cost for year 2, and then 35% or something for year 3. And then from that point on, then the city would have to take over.
Is that grant limited by how much that they would fund as far as the total grant per firefighter? I did some looking, I could not find anything.
It's similar to the COPS grant. What the COPS grant does, it gives you a lump sum over 3 years of $125,000. It's up to you to determine what percentage you win by that percentage. Like this last one, I think it required a larger amount up front than it did in the bond, as year 3.
And for the 2 police officers, Commissioner Schoberg, we did take into account the Cox grant in the future for the 2 positions that are before you here.
But that's not a given.
It's not a given, right?
We've been very fortunate in getting them in the past. but
Right.
it's not-
And so we're kind of using that optimistic assumption that we will continue to be eligible for that. But we obviously wouldn't pull the trigger on budget for those positions unless we had that grant in place.
And I think the summary is sustainable to add the 8 firefighters without the grant. Still exploring the grant to see what additional that could.
Yes.
And then we wanted to discuss with Mitch that if it's only 8, it can still function all through.
Okay, so you were asked immediately, what are your opinions? You've had 8.5 minutes now. Now, do you have any opinions on what you're, this first page?
My question I have is on, I know Chief Ziegler talked on the reserve police officers, that my understanding is that some of those folks may do it as a volunteer basis. So we wouldn't incur any of those dollars on those reserves. Is that correct? They're
Other than the WSI and.
WSI, so that's, okay.
Yeah, there'd be a minimal cost. And we would be able to cover uniforms and stuff like that. Or we just buy probably, four more firearms are about $450 a piece.
Yeah, if you look at page 2,
Yeah.
the only item not highlighted would be the reserve equipment costs.
Right.
That would be the one time. Greg and I discussed it, those funds. There'd be a good makeup.
I don't think they want right now. Having a reserve police department would, and not having would diminish the quality of law enforcement we're getting.
No, it wouldn't be a reserve police department, it would be a reserve unit beside the police department. And what they would be used for is supplemental forces to, like, we've got some events coming up where we posted out and officers are coming in to work overtime. So that's gonna cost us time and a half to bring those officers in. When if we had a reserve unit, we could cut that overtime cost, pretty significantly, where they could help run some of the buttons and balloons, the Fourth of July. Kind of a hard one because everybody has to work the Fourth of July, but give us extra manpower to help target harden the city. So that's what the reserves would be used for.
Yeah, to me, it'd be all dependent on the calls for service, all those numbers and all those requests for service, everything that goes into play that's currently there and what this does to affect that or not affect that.
Well, the calls for service, it won't affect your calls for service. We have no control over calls for service. Calls for service are something that a citizen or somebody calls us, then we respond to. Those are tracked by CINCOM. We don't have any control over calls for service. What we do have control over is who responds to them, how we handle them, manpower deployment, different things like that. Reserve officers would probably not affect calls for service or criminal reports. Their manpower is more for staffing at special events, security features, extra manpower. So let's say we need, 4 officers down during bugs and blues. 2 of them could be reserves and 2 of them could be our CERT team. And those 2 that are reserves would not accrue any overtime, where if we have to bring in somebody for overtime, or they wanted to CERT off the overtime to come in because they worked another shift the other day, that's where they would be utilized.
Which is it's not an everyday occurrence, it's not within the context of everyday life and law enforcement.
Correct, and they're limited to 40 hours a month.
Yeah.
We can't work for more than 40 hours a month.
I'm just looking at, looking at all the needs and stuff like too, and you look at the city as a holistic need, against it with that and how much that fits in, keeping in mind that, law enforcement field, there was always going to be a growing number of needs, whether it be technology and many other things too. Idealistically, it would be great, but I'm so sure we live in a very idealistic pattern of life every day.
Well, the question was asked to me, just at Pittsburgh Armstrong, was could they be volunteers? The answer to that question, yes, they could. Under Century Code allows them to be or volunteer.
And on the volunteer side, I think the main question would be, is the value there to pilot a volunteer reserve force with a $63,000 investment? I think that would be the overall decision.
Any more questions? Okay. Now, I will move on. So as a result of going through personnel, capital outlay requests, City Hall, Fire Station number 3, Budget and Finance Committee came up with a number of suggestions, recommendations for the City Commission to consider. First of all, in the general fund, recommendation is to increase the annual operating cash transfer from the 1% city sales tax fund from a 75% cash transfer to 87% next year, and then to increase that to 89% in 2029 and 2030. Second recommendation for funding is to increase the annual operating cash transfer from the water and sewer utility fund from 15% to 17% starting next year, and then to increase that to 20% in 2029 in 2030.
Greg, by increasing the from 1725, what would be the mechanism for doing that?
The general fund would already have those dollars in place with its existing reserve. So it's just a matter of just putting that money away and moving that money from unreserved to reserve. So we would not have to
It's not an outside
we
problem.
would not have to raise those funds. We already have those. And then the next slide is when we get into the justification of why. So any more questions on this page? Yep. Next, Budget and Finance Committee is recommending to increase the minimum operating reserve from 17% to 25%. The city's available fund balance and liquidity ratios currently comprise 30% of the city's total credit for Moody's. Been looking at House Bill 1176, which is passed this last legislative session. Everyone knows about the 3% property tax cap. Not saying this will impact the city's bond rating, but it certainly could impact the bond rating, not only for our city, but other local governments in North Dakota that depend on property taxes. So we feel as a city, it would be wise, it would be prudent for us to increase our operating cash reserve from 2 months to 3 months. I think that would be a good step forward as we show our ability to sustain our operations and not draw down from our operating reserves. One, because of the spend that we're going to have for 2026, but also for future years as we look at adding new employees, new positions, and replacing our machinery and equipment. Obviously, Moody's, our bond raters, are going to look at that 3% property tax cap. They're going to see that as a limit to revenue generation. And they're probably going to be looking at, oh, is Mandan going to be now drawing down their operating reserves to meet their essential services? I think we're going to do the opposite. We're actually going to, recommendation is to increase our reserve. I think in doing that, it'll help deflect some of the concern that Moody's may have about how a 3% property tax cap could impact the city of Mandan's bond rating going forward. We are going to be taking on debt with Memorial Highway, with water treatment plant, with Collins Reservoir. Pick your favorite project. There are a lot of wastewater treatment plant. The city's going to be taking on debt, and we know that's going to be a credit rating evaluation. When you look at a city our size and look at the amount of debt that we're going to take on for needed infrastructure, we need to be able to show something on the positive side that we are doing to be good stewards of the city's funds and not drawing down all of our reserves. And making this increase in the operating cash reserve, I think will be a good step forward. And the good thing is we don't have to find those dollars. We already have them banked up. It's just moving the money from unreserved to reserve in the general fund and locking up that 3-month cushion that we would then not touch. However, by doing that, increasing the minimum operating cash reserve will limit the number of employees or positions the city will be able to fund. But looking at 5-year plan and the items that are highlighted in green for new employees and positions, that 25% reserve was already factored in when determining which of the positions that we would be able to fund for the next 5 years are sustainable. So that has already been evaluated by increasing our minimum reserve to 3 months. Can we still afford these positions that we would be filling in the next 5 years? And can we sustain that? And the answer is yes. Yep.
I asked you this the other day and you got back to me quickly. Thank you. So we look back 10 years. We help refresh me. I asked how many employees per 1,000, right? Is that it?
Correct.
And did we account for the next 5 years in that ratio, or was that a snapshot of this year?
That was just a comparison of 2015 to 2025.
So we were 5.8 in 2015. 5.9 25.
Correct.
Did we run this out and are we still in that ratio?
I have not computed that. And the thought is that I think there's been some concern that we may be behind in filling some positions that have been requested in previous budgets.
Those were included in that figure.
The positions that,
Yes, the 25 figure.
yes, those were, right,
Yes.
yeah.
So we were 5.8, I think, employees in 2015
Per
per
thousand.
1,000 people. And if the increases last year proposed for 26 would be a 5.9.
Actually, only through the 2025 budget, we're at 5.9. So the number of employees per 1,000 has not changed in 10 years. Population has gone up, the number of employees that we've hired has increased, but the number of employees per 1,000 has not increased.
Is there a national average for that?
Not aware of one. I know there are averages or at least recommendations on, let's say, how many police officers you should have in your community or how many firefighters you should have. I know there's industry recommendations in those areas, but how many you should have as a city as a whole per 1,000, I'm not aware of what that number would be.
Well, that could be flexible because some cities privatize certain services.
That's
So that would greatly affect.
like we do with our solid waste, right?
So in 2015, it was 5.8, 2025, 5.9. And with the 15 positions here, I think going up to the 2035 estimated population, it comes to 5.85.
Oh, okay. Crack staff over there. Thank you.
Yes. So. We're probably gonna catch it a little while. Is there any more people? But it's totally responsible, very fiscally, cautiously optimistic is what we should have said earlier. What we're doing, okay? We didn't go to 6.5 or 7. Still in the same range as we were in 2015. Going out to, what did you say,
2035 is estimated population.
What's the estimated population again in 2035?
27,869.
That came from Andrew and planning department, if I'm not mistaken.
Get more weather like this weekend, we'll get double that.
Right. We get that weather in January.
Only people out south want to come up here.
Okay, moving on to the 1% city sales tax fund. Recommendation is to remove the maximum tax of $56.25 imposed upon any single transaction involving one or more items. That is in our municipal code. By doing this, it would increase the amount of city sales tax collections available to assist in funding infrastructure projects and the city's proposed capital improvement plan.
Usually a $10 fine in the legislature. If it goes up.
What we don't know is how many transactions there are that would reach that $56.25 cap. I don't know if the state tax commissioner's office would be, if that information is available. In other words, the question would be, well, how much more city sales tax would we generate by removing that cap? Do not know. But by removing the cap, for those transactions that are significant, we would obviously collect more. Just trying to think of those transactions that probably would reach that level.
So penitentiary.
Like the penitentiary.
Because this is not the vehicle or implement.
No,
side.
right,
So
yeah.
that's different.
That is different, yeah.
Excise tax and stuff. Excise tax. Might affect your side by side that you want to go buy.
I don't know how many other cities in the state are considering this. There might be others out there, but I know we've talked about this. 3/4 cent city sales tax, recommendation is to place on the ballot in the future a 1% city sales tax to replace the 3/4 cent city sales tax after the current bonds for the Starion Sports Complex are paid in full. And this 1% then, the new 1% city sales tax would then assist in financing the proposed improvements at the wastewater treatment plant. Current bonds that are financed by the 3/4 cent sales tax are projected to be paid in full sometime in 2027. Yeah.
Say Greg, on that, this FEMA thing of environment, the dike, all that big money, where's that coming out of? What's that? Citywide assessment? For the raising of the
Lower Heart.
Lower Heart,
That would be a citywide assessment. Yeah.
that's how that'd be paid on that.
Right. And there
For
would be,
sure.
I think there's like 2 different tiers for those assessments. Is that correct, Jared?
Yeah, there's the in-flood area and out.
When would that start?
The
I was gonna
assessment period.
Hoping to start construction in 2020. Maybe late 2026, 2027, start construction. 2 or 3 year project. And then assess after that,
So we wouldn't be assessed to complete the project then?
more than likely. We haven't, Lower Heart hasn't nailed down the 100% finance yet. That's probably.
So we
Probably 2030, 5 years.
There's only about 7.3 million left to pay on the Starion Sports Complex, or at least on that overall bond issue, which I believe was like 22 million.
It's a few years ahead of schedule, right?
It was, I think the bonds were originally projected, or at least when the bonds were sold, the bonds were to go out to 2041. And with the sales tax collections over the years, a lot of the bonds have been paid in advance. The 1/2 cent sales tax, the new one that went into effect in January of this year. Recommendation is to amend the code of ordinances to include new sworn police officer and career firefighter positions hired after December 31 of 2024. Please note that this measure that was passed by voters did not include this funding provision. Just as a kind of summary, the half-cent sales tax, 40% of that is carved out for public transportation needs. The other 60% of that half-cent sales tax can only be spent for police and fire vehicles, in stations, and city hall handicap accessibility. There was nothing in the measure that allowed the hire of not replacing existing staff, but hiring additional above and beyond the roster that the city has. It would be the only the sworn police officer or firefighter positions.
What's the ratio right now between Bismarck sales tax and Mandan City tax? Because one of the points of argument in the past is, well, if we get too high, people are gonna go over to Bismarck rather than pay the sales tax here.
We looked at that. It used to be what, 80-20, but I think it's you mean the ratio of sales tax between Bismarck and
Are
Mandan.
you talking about the?
No, I'm talking about the rate, yeah, you know, like, for example, they're told, let's say they're told city sales tax is 6.8, you know.
I think we're pretty comparable right now, because I
pretty fun.
Bismarck or Burley County passed a 1% public safety, Norton County passed the 1% public safety. Or 0.5%, not sure which one it was. The 0.5% to add on to the 1% for the jail.
I mean, I know, I
Bismarck
just.
passed the 0.5 for street improvement projects, which would be likened to Mandan's 3/4.
Right.
Sports complex. I think we're pretty close.
I mean, I know years back, I'll go back a couple of decades or so, that business people here were concerned about us getting too high and people not shopping at their place going to Bismarck, but they may not be the mindset anymore.
I don't think that has been proven out. For anything.
I think it's within 0.25% now, it's Kevin, which direction?
City has, but
So in order to change this, does this have to go to a vote of the citizens?
not to my knowledge, I believe you have the power to adopt an ordinance.
If we require check with any legal counsel in it.
Is that a motive?
We'd have to.
I think Amy has opined that it would take a 3/5 majority or something. There's 4 out of 5. I think commissioners would have to approve this change.
Without the change, a city really has no funding mechanism to hire additional police officers and career fire, the number that we need. You could probably hire maybe a couple without this provision, but you wouldn't be able to fill the gaps.
I think that's a conversation that we would have with the sponsoring committee. Put that initiated measure together. Because it didn't include personnel in it, and we would want to have that conversation first.
Is it the thought that there's going, with the 0.5 there'd be more than enough to cover the equipment piece of it? No,
There'd be more than enough to cover just equipment, yes.
right, so then there'd be untapped there when all the equipment needs are met, so then that's why that's why I thought is to bring in the positions.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, there isn't really a funding mechanism for firefighters and new firefighter positions and new police positions.
This is considering only our 60% of the totality of the distribution.
Right.
And that's why we modeled out instead of 5 years, 10 years with the 0.5 sales tax. Sure that positions are funded with that 6%. If this change from native ordinance.
And we're projecting annually a 5% increase in sales tax collections year over year over that period. Any more questions on that one? Okay, moving on, home rule charter. Recommendation is to adopt an ordinance that will allow the city to have broader authority than what is currently provided in the North Dakota Century Code in order to utilize bank loans and leases to finance machinery and equipment purchases. The North Dakota Century Code provides limits to what cities are able to do if you're not going to use your home rule charter authority, such as one of the limitations is that you're only able to borrow over 5 years up to 500,000. And which isn't a lot. There are other provisions that are limiting to what cities can do. Your home rule charter through an ordinance would then grant you greater powers and authority to do what you want. Would not require voter approval to do that, but in order to use your home rule charter authority, you would have to have an implementing ordinance in order to do that. And there are cities throughout the state that have done something very similar. Grand Forks, Fargo, West Fargo have passed ordinances to implement the home rule charter to do this very thing. And you'll see next here in the fire equipment reserve fund, we have a request for a couple fire engines. 500,000 is nothing to go very far if you're looking at a bank loan or a lease. So the recommendation out of because the half-cent city sales tax is going to have limited funds that could help pay for fire engines in 2029 and 2030. It would not have enough. So utilizing the fire equipment reserve fund to sustain that future cash flow, we would need to have the authority to go to local banks to look for longer term financing, let's say 7 years, 10 years, and you're looking at 1.3 million in 2020. So we would need that home rule charter authority to be able to structure the financing that would allow us to do the things that we need to replace much needed equipment for the fire department. And if there is a fire station number 3, that facility will need a fire engine and a fire truck in that area. So we need to be able to leverage our fire equipment reserve fund with the help of whatever the half-cent city sales tax might be able to do, but we're going to have those financing term provisions that would allow us to do that over a long-term basis, of which we would be restricted right now through the North Dakota Century Code by only looking at 5 years and 500,000, which isn't going to be enough for this.
Tying it back to your previous question on half-cent sales taxes, fire equipment reserve, even, I would say more limited on when you can spend the funds on than the half-cent sales tax. So these fall within what those funds can be used for. So that's why the thought is to fund these from the fire equipment reserve fund rather than the half-cent sales tax.
Mitch, what's the difference between a fire engine and a fire truck as far as the description there?
So for station 3, we look at fire engines, like a pumper truck and a brush truck there.
So the truck would be a smaller, less equipped vehicle?
The engine would be your standard, the one you see like down in Lakewood by your house. Would be the
Are you
engine.
required to have so many aerial
Yes.
ladders?
And right now, our city requires 1. City, you have to get to a little bit bigger than Bismarck, like Fargo, they run 2 ladders. Sorry.
Okay, moving on to City Hall and Fire Station number 3. The recommendation here would be to place on the ballot in the future a request to issue 20-year general obligation bonds. Roughly around 20 million would be the estimate for improvements for City Hall and for the construction of Fire Station number 3. If we do use general obligation bonds, 20 years is the maximum that state law allows. Under that provision, general obligation bonds for this purpose would require 60% voter approval. And if passed, the bonds would be repaid with a dedicated property tax levy over that 20-year period.
Is the dedicated property tax levy not capped by the 3%?
It is not capped, no.
So question. Because there's gonna come a day when you're either gonna have to expand the police department or it's gonna have to find a building. Will this affect that? The building will be a different bond that we have to go out and do that.
Probably a different bond.
And I think we're still trying to navigate through House Bill 1176 to see if we go to a vote to increase the mill levy. Pay for something like this, do we have to do that every 4 years, or I think it's, we do it once and then we're good for 4 years and then you can add on after that. But we're still working our way through that. So like I said, it's a, if we pay for new positions and we budgeted equipment out of the half-cent or the 60% of the half-cent, there isn't money left in there to pay for a new fire station or City Hall accessibility things. So that's why we're looking at this option, because again, we are trying to add personnel in those areas. It doesn't, this isn't, funding isn't there for a building. Only 1, 2, or 3.
As we broke it out, it just seemed that for sustainability of sales tax, something that happens year over year over year, that personnel made sense out of there. One-time amounts like a facility. I think people understand that easier to vote on why a property tax increase versus something that fluctuates as much as personnel does.
Another factor that's going to come into play here is we're not looking at it, but we also have the other taxing entities, park board, the school board, and the county. With some 35, 10 years down the road, what kind of competition are they going to be for our projects, or maybe some of the major projects?
You think about the school as what we have in place for the high school. I don't know if they have any elementary schools that they're considering coming on anytime soon. I think it's time to think of what we need to do for us.
I think we've taken a backseat too many times to those other entities.
Our job is to look out for the city, the park district, or the school district, so.
And to jump in, I mean, to get that dollar before they get it sometimes. And be proactive in that area.
Okay, anything else on that one? Okay, Municipal Infrastructure Fund, or better known as Prairie Dog Fund. Current cash balance that the city has in the bank for that is 12.4 million. If you subtract the infrastructure projects that are already committed out of this fund, that would be 5.1 million, which then would give an uncommitted cash balance of around 7.3 million. In order to navigate the city through the utilization of these funds, the Budget and Finance Committee is recommending that the engineering department continue to manage these funds for those projects that are considered to be eligible uses. according to the city's proposed capital improvement plan. Special assessment administration fee. The city currently charges for every special assessment district, whether it is either a maintenance project or a new development. The city will charge a 5% fee, which is used to help pay for the city's costs, whether it be engineering department, finance department, all the meetings and all the discussions of all the staff time that is put into a project from beginning to end, all the way through every year when we have to assess the next installment of that assessment project. There is time and effort that goes into that. So the city has charged a 5% administration fee that will then go back into the general fund to help. It's a revenue source to help offset some of those costs. Does that 5% administration fee pay for 100% of all the effort that the city puts in for special assessment projects? No, but we do charge a 5% fee, and we have been doing that for quite a while. The recommendation would be to keep that 5% fee for maintenance related projects. But should we consider increasing that administration fee to 10% for your new development projects, which would then, those additional funds would help further in meeting those costs for ongoing engineering, police and fire protection, and snow removal services that the city provides. Don't know if that's going to be very popular with developers, but as the city is looking for a revenue source to help offset the growing cost of providing city services to new developments, those costs are only going up for the city. And with the limited amount of property taxes that we're able to collect, does the city need to look at increasing that administration fee for new developments to help offset some of those one-time costs? As the city's footprint expands and grows, you know, we're having to plow more streets, and we're having to hire more police and protection, and the cost of engineering services, either consulting fees, those go up, or if we have to hire additional staff. You know, without property taxes, where are those dollars going to come from to maintain those, to maintain that level of service, especially as we expand into new developments that come online?
Do we have any idea of, Bismarck, for example, or others that do it once between new and current?
Haven't really done a survey, commissioner, of what other cities do for maintenance versus new, but I know that the admin fee that other cities charge are different. Some will base it upon, it's a different, like Bismarck, if it's still their current practice, if it's a 15-year assessment, they'll charge 4%. If it's a 10-year assessment, they'll charge 2%. If it's a 7-year assessment, they'll only charge 1%. Williston charges just a flat 20%. Fargo charges a flat 6%. The presumption is that it wouldn't matter if it was a maintenance project or new development. So it varies. It is considered by Century Code to be an allowable cost, but we have to be reasonable and fair. You can't just have such a high admin fee if you can't really support where those costs are to be utilized. So the question would be, again, does it make sense to look to your new developments as a way to generate the revenues you need to help provide those services, whether it's replacing, snow plows and hiring another firefighter. As the city grows, its service footprint's gonna grow too. And where's that money gonna come from if we are constrained by our ability to generate property taxes to provide those services?
Many of the expenses are a front load in a new development that need the new equipment now, that the new property tax that you get from new developments over time, that'll build up so you can cover some of those costs. But this is for that initial investment of 1 year property tax and then probably by or lower or whatever it may be. So it's those front loaded expenses that this helps offset.
And of course, we don't hire police and fire only to service a certain part of town. We don't replace equipment or buy equipment only to service a certain part of town, but it's just it's the concept that as the city grows, so do our needs to provide those services, and where is the money going to come from, especially when all of those costs are so expensive. We are currently undergoing a utility rate analysis study that is being done by A2S for our water, wastewater, and stormwater functions out of our water and utility fund. We are not done with that yet. We are still working with A2S on this study, and we're hoping to perhaps have more information that we'll be able to share with the commission at a later date, maybe June, maybe early July. Just depends upon when we can complete and wrap up this report. We for certain want to have our 2026 rates identified here soon for the 2026 budget, but this is also looking at our next 5 years. And we are not done with that work yet, but just want to give you an update that we have been meeting with A2S. We've had discussions with them, and we're going to continue to do that until the study is done, and then we will then update the commission in the near future.
When was the last time this was done or anything that adjusted?
As far as the methodology,
Methodology and the structures, residential, commercial.
I believe the methodology goes back, if I'm not mistaken, to the early 80s. I know I've been here 30 plus years, and the methodology of, let's say, a 2-unit pays twice the single family and a 3-unit pays 3 times the single family. That methodology has not changed in all of that time period. The rates have changed, obviously, but the methodology hasn't changed. Current methodology that a lot of cities will use when it comes to base charges for water, wastewater is based on your size of meter. I mean, there's probably other formats, but size meter seems to be the way to go in this economy, and our structure is very antiquated, and it needs to be reevaluated to make sure that the charges that we are allocating to our different customer classes, whether they're residential, commercial, industrial, etc. That we just need to update that so to make sure everyone is paying their fair share when it comes to providing water, wastewater, stormwater services. And we're not done with that effort yet. So we want to make sure that we do our due diligence, do this well. And we'll have more information to share in the next month or so on this. And the last meeting we had on this was on the 22nd of this month, was our last update. Next steps, moving on to the 2026 budget. The next step is department managers have until the end of the month to provide their operating budget worksheets to the finance department. In June, the finance department will review and update the revenue, expense, and fund balance projections for the 2025 budget. We already did this for the long-term financial plan. We did that as of the end of March. But as a matter of practice, we always update the current year budget on paper twice a year, once at the end of the first quarter and then in the second quarter. So we'll be able to update our fund balance projections because we want to have the most accurate and most reliable number for our beginning year fund balance projections for the 2026 budget. In July, the Budget and Finance Committee will review and approve recommendations for the preliminary 2026 budget. On August 5th, the Budget and Finance Committee will present the preliminary 26 budget to the City Commission. The City Commission at that time will approve the introduction and first consideration and call for a public budget hearing on the ordinance adopting the 2026 budget. The next meeting on the budget in September, we have two options that we want to roll out. Option number one would be what we traditionally have done, and that is the second meeting in September. We would conduct the budget hearing at that meeting, and then after the public budget hearing, we would traditionally approve the second and final consideration and adoption of the 2026 budget. Option two would be on September 16 is just to have the public hearing. And then we would then table the second and final reading of the annual budget. We would wait until the first meeting in October. October 7th, by the way, is the last day that you can approve the budget. So the budget would have to be approved on October 7th. So the question would be, commissioners, what would your preference be?
Doing the second option, what we're doing is giving the public more opportunity.
I think
Is that the objective of it?
I think, Commissioner, it's to actually give the commission time to be able to consider and think about all of the comments that might be made at the public hearing. And it would allow the commissioners maybe to do some follow-up questioning and get more information from staff.
In the past, I felt that if you get that line thing, it's kind of there's not a good hiatus there. Or that'd be good to, I like the second option myself.
So what we're doing is we're kind of trying to develop a consensus amongst the commission to see what would be preferable.
Maybe plan to have any other studies when you get down to more to the end to kind of review anything as a group again like this here, or
Say that, are we going to,
no, when you get down, you go straight here in budget finance, when you get down to like what I call a final draft, is there a need for everybody to get together to review that draft before it goes into the public hearing?
I think we'll have that. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
In your
Yeah,
presentation.
the preliminary budget would be what you're referring to, Commissioner Rohr, in August, that first meeting in August.
We'll have a presentation there for that.
Yes, there will be a presentation at that meeting. And then when the public hearing comes, I would get up and I would just not go through the budget again, but I would introduce the item, and then the mayor then would conduct the public budget hearing and allow people that are there to get up and speak.
And then also the intent for the 5-year long-term plan is to bring that to a commission meeting for final adoption, separate from the 2026 budget.
Right, yeah, thank you, I forgot about that, yeah.
Well, I think we heard from a handful of individuals this last go around about more public. Feeling like what they said in the meeting didn't really matter, right? And even though they've had opportunities to say things before that. So I would like option two. Unfortunately, you know, it's right against that, you know, like you said, the final day to do it, that puts us in a little bit of a bind to make sure we get all our ducks in a row on the final day, but I would leave with option two. So.
Same here.
It makes no difference for the finance department. I mean, either way works for us. It's just that you're up against that last day. And it's because October 7th is that first Tuesday in October, which coincidentally is the final day by century code that you have to approve your final budget.
Just my opinion was last year. Being my first, obviously, it's like people that cared enough to show up, voice their opinions. And then we went ahead and voted to pass it anyway. Just didn't seem as though we as a commission had time to actually consider what their concerns were. And I think we owe those people that did take time in their lives to show up, take the podium. The least we could do is to discuss some of those options. Because there were two people that came up with some pretty sharp ideas.
The only thing the commission would be up against on October 7th is you wouldn't be able to increase anything in the budget. You could only decrease. So if you had public comments that said, we would like the city to add more money into the budget to do A, B, and C, you wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to double check that again, but certainly that second final hearing, you could not increase anything that was in the preliminary budget. But I'd have to go back and check, but I think at the preliminary, the first meeting, the commission could increase, but that's not the public hearing date. So you would know that if the public wants more money to be spent for something that would increase the budget, the commission on October 7th legally would not be able to do that.
And that should be easy to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you guys have talked about, but you'd be able to make a budget amendment almost immediately afterwards.
Yes.
To make an, yeah.
Yeah.
Can't change your property tax levy.
Oh,
Change your budget.
Gotcha.
After the official budget's been adopted, right? Yeah. So you could consider a citizen's request to, let's say, spend more on a particular thing through budget amendment after October 7th. You just couldn't do it at that meeting.
I just think it would be a better presentation for those people that did show up. Public hearing. That their concerns were met between that time and October 7th, so I'm all in for option two.
Okay. If that's the consensus then. Okay, last item, once the 2026 budget has been adopted. Now the finance department's already looking at the following year. So the recommendation going into the 2027 budget planning would be to amend the city's current long-term financial planning policy to revise the length of that annual financial plan from 5 years. Yeah. I think that we have talked about in previous working sessions that would be the goal. We would want to get through the 2026 budget process first. And then right after that, we would then amend this planning policy.
But you have to initially start in more particular as it goes to the general, as time goes on. You can't start, say, 10 years, and looking so far down the road of 10 years, you can't start in the first 1 or 2 years, the same way you're looking 10 years. At least I don't think so anyway. you're, you're really forecasting quite a ways down the road.
You
You
are.
can look at, you need to look at more initial things initially. And then those other things are gonna be kind of out there. Look at the box of the binocular and you see what's coming.
But even when, Commissioner, you take a look at our 5-year plan and you see that there are a number of things that are not highlighted. It's because we are looking 5 years down the road and we see that, oh, we won't be able to sustain something. So we're not going to recommend something because we know, looking at the projections 5 years down the road, and even 5 years down the road, the economy can change.
Population,
The
yeah.
metrics can change,
Yeah.
but at least that gives us that we can be proactive instead of reactive to some things and not making spending decisions that's going to cost us.
It's good to have the compass point in a certain direction. Now, whether you
Right.
follow the roads, gotta take you there, it's up to you, but
Exactly.
it's good to have the compass point.
And our 5-year planning, 10-year planning is going to be a very fluid document. It is something that we're going to have to review it in-house administratively throughout the year. Just to make sure that our projections are still on par.
One of the benefits for the commission will be, yes, your years 1, 2, 3 will be more precise than your 10.
Oh, yeah.
But you'll be able to see, the decision you make in year 2, what the impact in year 10 of that decision is. It'll just help you see that in a quick snapshot.
40, 50 years ago, we did budgets, it was year to year. I mean, there's no,
Yeah, and
just
we
year
don't,
to year.
what projects do we have that have a 1-year cycle? What?
Zero.
What projects do we have that have a 2-year cycle?
Most. I really feel like most small projects.
Yeah, most of them, the large ones, do what? 3, 5.
Yeah, that's what that's gonna be.
And more, I always probably been 15, 20 years.
So the first 3.
Bring that up.
Been many years, so. This makes sense, not to budget on a year-to-year basis. Take it out to 10 years. And the funding, matches up to, correct, if we, do a mill and overlay, that's a 15-year. Is that where we want to get to? Match these projects up, or, so we have a forecast out of our payments?
Thinking the pavement side, you'd want to be doing chip seal at 7 to 8 years and the mill and overlay at 15. Depending on the sub base of the material and things like that. In a perfect world. Probably what you do.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, obviously trying to lengthen that time as much as possible, but I think that's all you can count on. When you're forecasting. So this.
And like Justin brought up, our CIPs for utilities and for transportation, we want to bring those CIPs in front of the city commission for approval. And then at that same meeting, we want to bring A2S to come in. And they will then at the same time provide their utility rate analysis study.
Without knowing the rate side of the equation, it would be premature tonight to talk about which projects, right, where would be the notable rate impact.
Timing wise, what are we thinking? On that.
That's what we say June, July.
Within the next month is when
Yeah.
people really have it finalized, so start going through the link.
Okay.
Meet with them.
So since January, we've had a lot of meetings.
Anyway, how have you guys found this process?
I think it's been around the city for a long time. I think it's a vast improvement over the way we're approaching projects, finance, organization, cooperation, all of things.
A couple things, there's been things that have been presented in here that we make. In order to make this work. Then those changes that have been presented, like we have to go from a 17 to a 25% reserve. We need to go from 75 to 89% in the sales tax collection, money feeding into the general fund to make what we've presented work. I think included in here is for 2026 anyway, 3% across the board salary increases, which matches up, I think, with the indexes that we use. The health insurance, we have budgeted for a 10% increase in 2026, but we've dropped that down to 5% in 2027 and 2028 because 10% every year it's just not feasible to do. I think Amy's given us the numbers on the average increases over the past 10 years are 6.9 or something.
Over the past 12 years,
12.
it's almost 6.9%.
6.9.
Two of those years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
6.9.
With two of those years being,
So those are things we've factored into the long range plan in here too, but again, if those assumptions move, then other things move along with it. And so if the commission were to say we want 5% salary increases, okay, then what are we taking out of these plans to fund it? And I think with Greg and Justin have looked at the new legislation at 1176 and factored those amounts in here on what those caps mean. So, and that's, like I said, without those assumptions that we talked about in here, whether it be being able to pull new position salaries for police and fire out of that half-cent sales tax, this goes somewhere else. And then you aren't able to fund those positions unless those assumptions are done. So again, we've got some work on our end with Attorney Oster to make those call legislative changes to make that thing work. But like I said, these are the assumptions that need to be put in place to make the cake. So this is the recipe book. There's the cake, and all those things need to go in and make this work.
So will those assumptions be presented as the business items of the commission meetings?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's basically every assumption in here was built into making this happen.
Correct.
If those assumptions don't happen, then we're back into the cake and start, the ingredients need to be changed.
So we could use those new business, that realm, to present these concepts in a manner that will educate the citizens like we've been trying to do since July of.
Educate and justify why we're doing what we're suggesting needs to be done.
That's a doable option for the public to get educated in.
Okay, so sum this up in the general vernacular, not your vernacular. Commissioner Schober's point. People are gonna talk. And they're gonna say, did you see what the city did? They're gonna do this, they're doing that. You tell me why this is responsible.
It is responsible because we have looked into the future and we want to make sure that whatever we do spend above and beyond our current budget, whether it's replacing equipment or adding new positions, that we're able to sustain it, but is equally as important is to make it as affordable as possible to the taxpayer.
Would you consider this fiscally conservative?
I think the way I put it is the commission and
Fiscally right.
the commission and staff met 7 times 8 with tonight to identify needs-based budgeting and eliminate anything that wasn't the need. Then these are the financing options to cover the needs that the city has. I think we did a good job of removing all the wants on the list and only focusing on the needs that the public has asked for. So that's where I would say I believe it's a fiscally responsible process by starting with the needs-based budget rather than, hey, it's how many dollars we have, how do we spend?
It's a good model, very good model, because I go back to different budgeting, you have zero-based budgeting, I can give you 5 different types of budgeting processes, and this one here actually makes the most sense and is more responsible. Way of doing business.
What are the needs? Now, how do we fund it?
What the public may not know yet is what all of those needs are between now and the next 5 years or 10 years.
Just a question, sorry. When would, like you mentioned about a vote for the city hall and fire station 3, when would that be? Just roughly. Just thinking about telling the story and that happens.
It's only gonna get, it's only going to cost more the longer you wait. Problem is, if you build fire station number 3, you don't have enough people to fully staff it. Question would be for fire station number 3. Based upon the timing, you indicated 2030. However, city hall's needs are probably, very immediate. But does it make the most sense to put the 2 items on one ballot or to separate them?
I mean, if you look at fiscal responsibility, the sooner you build it, better. But then there's the public perception of, are you functioning out of that building? Where there's 2 sides of the equation.
I mean, could you build fire station number 3, but you don't operate it as a fire station until you're able to properly staff it? And then what do you do with that facility if it is built and it's not a fire station? Is it used for another? Could it be used for a temporary purpose for something else until it is converted and finally built out as fire station number 3, because now you can staff it?
Well, Mitch has been in contact with the chief, our chief, that's in exactly the same size city as ours. They got to build big, I was down, I looked at it, big, beautiful fire station. But they went under the concept that we cannot afford to build this same building 3 to 5 years down the road. So we're gonna build it now and we'll staff it as we go along and work it out the best we can, because it's gonna cost way too much. We probably won't get it built if we have to wait 3 to 5 years down the road.
We build a new fire station and temporarily relocate city hall folks up there while we figure out what to do here.
We'll buy the Corvette, put the engine in later.
And then I think it could be a different discussion on when you go to a vote versus when you start construction as well.
But if you separate out the 2 buildings, I can see people voting for the fire station and not for city hall. Just in general, people don't realize how bad city hall is. And if I wouldn't work here and I didn't know any of this stuff, I would vote for the fire station and not city hall. I can see that happening if they're separate.
Natural public inclination is to go police and fire, but you have a fire station if you cool.
I mean, everybody wants to be fire. Nobody wants to be.
There's some timing things to work out and some logistic things to work out on those facilities. Timing, I mean, by if we go to if the sports complex gets paid off in 2017 and we go to the voters prior to then asking for that, when that 3/4 cent goes away, then 1 cent goes in to fund portion of the wastewater treatment plant facility. And then do you go back a year or 2 later and say, now it's time for police and fire station vote? We're gonna get into some, but those are all discussions to have at a later time, but those are.
To answer your question, Mayor, too, I think, we've heard for the last year about these cities and counties are just gonna figure it out when it comes to the property tax thing. So I would say to them, and I'm proud to sit next to the finance people here, that you've figured it out, and you figured it out before it becomes a problem, and the comment to cut your nose off to spite your face. You're looking at what the potential Moody's not having the liquidity ratio does to our borrowing percentages and things that we're gonna do later. So you've come up with a plan before it becomes a problem. So I would say that to the folks that say you're spending more. Yes, we are spending, we're in line, I think, with what some of the pieces that we've talked about, the personnel and stuff. But we are being forced to figure it out with this House Bill 1176, but we're looking at the future. Yeah, well beyond when they're gonna reconvene in the next session.
It has always been my observation, if I'm a taxpayer at home watching a conversation like this. Not only do I like to hear from staff, what you just said, Commissioner, I think goes a long ways in establishing credibility and trust with the taxpayer to actually hear commissioners articulate that same message that staff has been saying. That it's not that staff is trying to convince the commission and the commission is trying to weigh, but that the commission is in lockstep with staff and can articulate the same message that staff has been saying. But you have the ability up there at the commission table to create that megaphone that perhaps staff can't always do that. And to know that my commissioner who I voted for is getting up there and saying the same things, repeating the same message that staff is, it's like, oh, that offers some ground truth. What staff is saying, the commissioners believe the same thing and they're repeating that because it's the truth. And that's the message that needs to be conveyed.
I'd like to see it go another step too, just based on things that I've heard. Out in the world, is that if you guys, engineers, so far what I've seen in public hearings off campus, all done a wonderful job. I mean, if you've de-escalated a couple of shark feeding fences that I've personally watched, raise the hair on the back of my neck. But if you could maybe, if we could be a little bit more inclusive of these guys, the engineering guys, to get up there, and maybe articulate from your standpoint, like, why do we do 7 years on gypsy? Why do we do 15 years on this, 20 years? Technical perspective, people, they don't get involved. And then all I've been getting, to be brutally honest, is that, either you take us or we take you out for a steak and a movie. It's being very nice. Stay on, so, and please be honest and not necessarily confrontational, but then again, not always agreeable. Because the public doesn't understand that, you know, like working with Jared Riley, I've known some cases since last July what's coming down the pipe. The public thinks that we got that information last week, we're acting on it. Whoa, this guy. It's a long time. And that's why your commission meetings, I mean, been vocal about. And categories when these guys could work. And options are out here for every department that. Project figure out say funds. But I'm expecting to get that from the district. As well, my opinion. Right or wrong? Yeah.
Well, I can tell you this. The next 5 years, we're gonna be accused of everything. Because if people see a project, whether it's the federal DOT at Sunset Interchange. Or the state DOT on the strip, they're assuming it's city of Mandan stuff. Now we have a little bit in there, but we're not paying for the whole. So anything that happens, they're gonna say you guys are spending way too much money. They came to us last year, if you recall, and wanted to know why we didn't notify any. Why we didn't notify them and how much is it costing for this company, Michaels, to be doing what they're doing. It's not costing us anything, that's MDU. It's gas line. But they see that and then they believe it's us. The beauty of this is it's all within the framework of what we can afford. So there's going to be building, we are moving everything forward. And we can defend it. We're not putting any, not put the city in the hole. We can defend it. And I think that's the biggest thing with this, because all these things need to be done. And somebody said, we don't sit around City Hall and pull projects out of a hat, or we're playing cards and say, what should we do tomorrow? That's not the case. So I think it's very important that commissioners and department heads are armed with this, because we're gonna hear it. We always do, right?
Probably doesn't have a universal brain. You know, there's about 1,001 different opinions, 1,001 different oppositions. Make me happy here, make me unhappy here. I hear the public is very, they're very fragile and very fickle. At least that's my experience.
We have to do what what's his name, Garrett, Black Lions. Two comments. 236 public hearing that I heard that I thought was very well phrased is we are all part of the Mandan team. We are Mandan strong. We're doing this with the majority of the people. Use the word teamwork for the future of this community. That's what it boils down to, is our kids and our grandkids. It's too late for me, I'm 71, I'm pushing on Daisy's probably a couple of years, so, you know, but for our kids and grandchildren.
Or maybe two.
Or for all you young. You know, 40. Like that. So we have to prepare this and make things a lot more easier. Allow them to be publicly educated and more understanding of green versus. That's the goal. If we can do that in 2028, then message received.
Well, we took 5 months. It's this. Anything else?
No.
Mr. Nebo?
And just a big shout out to all department heads, Greg and Justin, for putting this information together. You got another deadline coming up on May 30th, so, but again, it's a very much a group. Together, you know, it's a big lift on the part, so appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
And everyone's time from January until now. Kind of beating up your second and fourth, fifth Tuesdays. That's time has been appreciated. And input.
With that, the future meeting dates for the Board of City Commissioners, Tuesday, June 3rd at 5:30 p.m. Tuesday, June 17th at 5:30. Tuesday, July 1st at 5:30, and Tuesday, July 15th. It's a Sunday at 5:30. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
She's one of them.